This happened to me a few years back. I live in a suburban neighborhood that borders a large park, part of which is public and the rest is a closed-off reservoir. The public section of the park is sprawling over several acres. There are hiking trails in the woods, a baseball field, basketball and tennis courts, and a playground area. The park is accessible by car via a winding one-lane road that goes through the playground area and around to more remote sections in the woods. Eventually, this road leads out to a major busy highway. At one point, it was used as a cut-through to get from the highway to my neighborhood and beyond. Nowadays, there are several much larger access points to the neighborhood, and the cut-through is seldom used. My story begins on a late winter afternoon. I was spending the day at home with my now ex-husband, who was an avid runner. He decided to go out on foot into the park to take a run down the one-lane road. He did this often, and the crime rate in this area is extremely low, so I thought nothing of it. After about an hour or so, he comes back, all sweaty. I asked him how the run went, and his time per mile, etc. He tells me he was slower than usual that day and just wasn't feeling very well during the run. As he's heading to the shower to rinse off, he casually says, "Oh, I heard this dog whimpering in the woods when I was running." I'm a bleeding heart for wounded animals and asked him for more specifics. He said that he had not gone to look for the whimpering dog because the noise had stopped shortly after it started. He then said the last thing we need is another pet and went off to shower. I sat there for a bit, looking at my 3 dogs laying on the floor and lazily pawing at each other. After a few moments, I couldn't stand it anymore, so I laced up some tennis shoes, grabbed some treats, and headed to my car. My husband was just getting out of the shower by then, and I told him I was going to go look for the dog. He said I was crazy, but didn't try to stop me, nor did he want to go back out with me. By now, daylight was fast fading, and it was close to 5:30 p.m. The spot he'd heard the whimpering was about 2 minutes from our house. I drove over and pulled my car into the shoulder so as not to block the lane. I got out and started calling for the dog. "Here, doggy," and other similar phrases to see if it would start whimpering again or come out to greet me. I heard nothing, so after a minute or so, I decided to venture out into the woods. The woods in this area of the park are not too dense, with trees spaced at least 8 to 10 feet apart on average, and the forest floor was blanketed with fallen leaves. Every step I made was a loud crunch. I'd stop, call out, and be still for a bit, and then slowly move further into the woods. I thought I could hear a dog whimper once or twice, but it always happened as I was calling out, so I couldn't be sure. The further I walked, the less light there was, and the more dense the trees became. I had brought my cell phone, but this one didn't have a flashlight app at the time. I'd been out there walking, calling, and stopping for about 20 minutes when I came upon a small clearing. I've always been fascinated by the occult, but all the stories I'd read did not prepare me for what I saw in that clearing. The first thing that caught my eye was this formation of sticks laid out on the ground. The sticks were all of the same size and formed a small circle. Inside the circle, there were 3 more sticks, propped up in a tripod formation in the center. On the top of the tripod was a small doll's head with the eyes missing from their sockets. I immediately had this "oh fuck" moment where I realized that I was a woman alone in the woods at dusk with no form of protection on me and in a spot where I clearly was not meant to be. I froze in place as I surveyed the surroundings. To make myself less scared, I called out again softly this time. "Come here, puppy." There were small bones in a pile at the far edge of the clearing. A bush to my left had several more gouged-eyed dolls' heads hanging from the branches. It was not windy that day, but I swear I heard the rustling of leaves that last time I called out for the lost dog. As I scanned the perimeter from left to right, my eyes suddenly fixed for a split second across the clearing on something in the trees. There, about 8 to 10 feet back in the bushes, was a man's face. I kept my eyes moving because something told me not to let him know I'd seen him by staring or reacting in any way. The brief moment I glanced at him was enough to momentarily paralyze me. His hair was long and unkempt. His eyes were bulging almost as he stared at me. I couldn't see the rest of him because of the tree cover. At this point, my flight response finally kicked in, and I was able to move again. I remember saying something to the effect of, "Silly dog, must have found his way home," as I started to back out of the clearing, still scanning. He didn't appear to be pursuing me, so as soon as I was half hidden by trees on my side, I took off running at full speed to my car. I couldn't tell how long it took or how far it was, but daylight was all gone by now. I somehow made it back to the road, a few yards behind where my car was parked. I sprinted to it and locked myself inside. It took me 4 attempts to get my key in the ignition, with how badly my hands were trembling. I finally got the car started and beat it the hell out of there. Took the long way home to my house by going out to the main highway and entering my neighborhood through another well-traveled intersection. As soon as I was home, I called the police to report what I'd seen. They never followed up with me. The more I've thought on this over the years, I'm convinced that the man in the woods was the one whimpering to lure a gullible victim like me off the little road and into the woods. So this was a few years back, and I was walking home from a friend's house after hanging out at hers after school. It was around 9:30 p.m. in summer, so the sun had, for the most part, set. It was relatively dark, but still bright enough where I could make out the things around me. I was stoned and was walking very slowly down the road to my house, which was only about a 20-minute walk away from my friends. Majority of my walk was spent on a straight, quiet suburban street that was very familiar to me, as I'd done this walk plenty of times before. After maybe 5 minutes of walking, I noticed the first and only car to drive past. It was an old, beat-up, white Honda, which I didn't take much notice to until another few minutes passed, and it drove past again. Still, I wasn't concerned, and continued about my walk, admiring the cracks in the pavement, or doing whatever else a stoned 14-year-old does on a walk. Another minute passes, and this car drives past again, this time more slowly, and I feel my stomach drop. I couldn't make out who was inside, but I knew something was off. I've always been very timid, so I try to convince myself it's just paranoia and that I was just being dramatic, until it drives past again about 2 minutes later and parked maybe 10 feet in front of me. As I approached the car, I kept my head down, but I hear a,
"Hey there."
And sure enough, I look up, and there was a rough-looking man who, you could just tell from appearance alone that he smelled like stale cigarettes and body odor, sitting in the driver's seat, smiling at me. The lack of teeth and dirty shirt this man had on gave me a horrible vibe, so I just gave a little smile back and continued walking. I look up, and I notice he's driving alongside me, and he asks if I had directions to the closest gas station. I stopped and pointed in the general direction and told him where to go and that it was less than a 5-minute drive away, when out of nowhere, he just started to laugh. I kind of just stared in confusion and fear as he squinted his eyes at me like he was trying to get a better look at my face. Then he said,
"I'll take a guess, but I think I could tell from those eyes that you've been smoking pot, little miss."
I kind of just laughed and tried to walk away, when he said,
"Come back."
So I stopped in my tracks. Why I didn't just keep walking is beyond me. But I turned around, and he pulls out a rather large bag of weed and asks if I want some. I tell him I'm okay, that I have no money, and he said something along the lines of,
"I don't need your money. Take it."
I reassured him I'm fine, and I don't eat it, and try to continue walking. But nonetheless, he continued driving alongside me. He then asked if I needed a ride home, and tells me it's too dark to be walking alone, which really frightened me. He continued trying to coerce me into his car, and I became more and more unsettled. I began to look for the closest house with a light on, and after finding one, I tell him, "This is my house. Good night," and walked up some stranger's driveway and walked straight into their home. There was a middle-aged couple sitting in the living room, and they looked extremely shocked and equally angry, and I just start to sob out of shock and relief and apologize profusely. I explained to them what just happened, and the very kind lady assured me I did the right thing and gave me a ride home. Looking back, I probably should have knocked, but I was scared, under the influence, and still a child, and the homeowners were very understanding. Still, one of the scariest things that has happened to me, but I'm so glad I trusted my gut and got away from the man whose intention seemed anything but pure. I still consider myself lucky that I got away. My husband works a rotating schedule, so sometimes he works night shifts, and other times he works days. 2 days ago, he started his night shift rotation. I always feel uneasy at home when he's not here, even though we live in the country and it's supposed to be safer out here. Around 9:30 Friday night, I was doing my dishes. My daughter was watching TV, and my dogs were sleeping. I had just turned the sinks off, and I heard our screen door open. It makes a swoosh kind of noise when it opens and closes. We have a little entryway between the screen door and the main door. A couple of seconds after I heard the screen door, I saw the main door handle turn all the way down. It has an electronic keyboard lock, so the handle turns even when it's locked. I feel so lucky that I remembered to lock it. Immediately, the dogs start acting weird. They're running to all the windows, trying to look out, and they're growling and barking. As much as I didn't want to, I looked out the window and saw nothing. No person, no car, nothing. I picked up my daughter and took her to the bedroom and called 911. It only took a few minutes for cops to get here, because I guess they were just in the area. I told them what happened, and they looked around briefly and told me that the wind opened the screen door and nobody was out there. Whatever. I live in the woods. The person was probably standing 100 feet away, watching them half-ass their search. I haven't felt safe here since. I've even started locking the screen door. It's not like the house looked empty. All the lights were on, and the TV was playing a show. I can't even describe the deep-down fear I felt when I saw the door handle turn. I'm glad the dogs are very vocal and scary-sounding. I think it deterred the person from trying any harder to get in. Hi friends, I hope you're staying safe. If you enjoyed this video, please consider liking and subscribing. It would really mean a lot to me. Thank you for listening. Sweet dreams.